We are now live. We are broadcasting. This works. Fantastic. I had no qualms about this at all. I was obviously very calm that this was always going to work. So we're now live on this webinar with Elatia Abate. So we've got a number of people registered. We're just going to give everyone 30 seconds or so, or a minute to log on. We've got a chat function on the side going. So if you guys are online, feel free to just send us a little ping and just say hi, and you know, we'll know that we're not just talking to ourselves. Although I have had a couple of people who've said they're registered but unable to attend, but they're really looking forward to the recording. So I think this will be great because we can have some interaction on the webinar, and then we can also go in and have people listen to the recording afterwards. Whilst we're waiting for everyone to log in, because I can see some people are now live and they're logging into the system. We've got Andres, Alfredo, Tom, James, Arthur. Hello, everyone. Feel free just to ping us. But Elatia, do you want to just start? I know I've given a little bit of background to you on the webinar invite, but just to give people a little bit of background of who you are, where you're from. I know you've got quite an impressive CV and background, especially around this topic.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, so I am so excited to be here, by the way. And I have spent most of my career recruiting, scouting, interviewing, hiring talent all over the world. And I ran recruiting for Anheuser-Busch InBev, a huge consumer goods company, and then also Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And what kept on happening, and so I've had, you know, thousands and thousands of interviews. I got tired of meeting people who are fabulous, talented, creative, everything, but bored. And what I realized as I began to dig into this is that beyond my anecdotal evidence about it, that the stats will also tell you that most people around the world, 87.5% of people globally, are disengaged or highly disengaged at work. And so I read that as disengaged, meaning not interested or bored, to highly disengaged, miserable, or worse. And it's just insane to me. 87.5% of people. So think, you know, next time you're on the tube or, you know, walking around town, most everyone around you is not happy at work. So I went into business for myself. Now I work as an entrepreneur and coach to solve for that problem, because I think that humanity deserves better.
That's incredible. I mean, the title of this webinar, we changed it a little bit, but now the title of this webinar is Doing Work That You Love. And that's incredible. So 87.5% of people are disengaged. So at first I thought, well, that means only 12.5% of people do work they love. But no, that's just 12.5% who don't dislike their job. So I'm guessing in that 12.5% it includes people who are just okay. So it's a tiny percentage of people that love their job, I'm assuming. And what was really interesting, we were talking before we started the webinar today, and I did a quick poll for my group, for the Powerful Men's group, for who we're recording this webinar for. And the number one thing that came back in terms of what was important for people in their career was doing work that they love. And you know, it sounds like that's something that people really, really want. And it's also something that not a lot of people have access to, or they're not enjoying that at the moment.
Yeah, and why is that? So as we dig into this, and the reason why I believe it is that most of us are taught to think about our jobs as from a strategy that I'll call a building block strategy. But before we even dive into that, if you think about the universe before we graduate from high school, or before you go into university and then graduate from university, think about the difference between that world and congratulations, you've graduated and now you're out into the real world. Your track is linear. So, you know, after first grade, you go to second, after middle school, you go to high school, or whatever the equivalent might be in England. Yeah. After high school, you go to college or university, and you're forward moving. Your measures of success are really clearly defined. You know, I got the good grade, I didn't, I'm popular, I'm not. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you step out into the world. Congratulations, you've graduated, and there's infinite opportunity, most of which you can't see, but you're still operating in this kind of one-track mindset. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that the way that we're taught to think about career is to have a look around us and say, what can I do? What have I done before? And what can I logically do next with this set of skills that I have? And so you kind of build one block and then you get to the next job and the next job with that same logical process. The problem is that if you've made some bad decisions in the past, or if you've chosen a career that you don't particularly like, then you're just making decisions based on bad decisions based on bad decisions. And so it's no wonder that most people end up in jobs that aren't particularly fulfilling.
So I guess one of the questions is, I remember when I was working in a corporate job as well, most people don't, and again, this is just anecdotal, I may be completely off here, but from my anecdotal evidence, I found that most people didn't even think it was possible to have a job that they loved. It was kind of like fluke or luck, and it was reserved for, a small group of people. But in your opinion, I mean, how possible is it? I mean, is it possible for that small percentage to really grow, or, for the vast majority of people, is it just, you got to do what you got to do?
Yeah, so it is absolutely possible for that percentage to grow. And I think the first and most important thing is to strip away this notion that there's one right, perfect thing for me, and if I don't get that, I'm going to be miserable. There is no one right thing, but the difference is if you kind of think about your career on a continuum or your life on a continuum, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I'm totally miserable and 10 being nirvana. If you're at a 3 today, could we, by implementing some different thinking about career and job, could we get you up to a 5? I'm sure we could. And once we get you to a 5 and you feel what that looks like, could we get you to a 7 or an 8 or a 9? So it's all, instead of thinking about it as the one job that's going to make me happy or otherwise I'm toast, realizing that it's a process that pulls your interests, what challenges you, the kinds of things that help you grow intellectually. So it's absolutely possible to increase that number.
That's really fascinating, Elatia, because I was talking to someone recently and they were saying, I find a lot of people get stuck in inertia. And again, this is anecdotal, this may not be true, but again, from my experience, from my small world of people that I come across, there are a lot of people that say, I want to do stuff that I love, I want to find my passion, and I don't know what it is yet. So because they don't know what it is yet, they don't do anything. And what's really interesting about what you're saying is that's not a kind of a one-off thing. So you're doing stuff you don't like, you don't enjoy. You have an insight moment where it's like, now I need to do that's the dream job, and then you get the dream job or the dream career or the dream business. And when what you're saying is no, it's a process.
Yes, exactly. So right now, I'm doing something that I love. I am so in love with what I do. I wake up every morning. I'm really, really excited about it. But this didn't happen overnight. And I didn't know it while it was happening, but it was actually about a 4.5-year process. And even now it continues to evolve. So when I was working at Anheuser-Busch InBev, it was a fantastic opportunity, really sexy on paper. I mean, I was traveling all over the world, meeting all kinds of great people, but I was tired. I was jet lagged all the time. I was on the road quite a bit. And it's a company that's run by engineers. And so I wanted an environment that was a little bit more creative. So I made a switch to Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal, which is a more creative, because it's a media company, a more creative kind of a space, much less travel, fewer hours. And I was much happier there. So I was able to go from that, 4 to a 6 or 5 to a 7. But once I got there, I began to realize, wait a minute, maybe now that I've got a more creative kind of a corporate space, maybe I just don't like being in a structured office. And so that was kind of that next step for me. So it was a process, but I couldn't have figured out the coaching thing until I had gone through all of those other steps.
Yeah, that really reflects my own experience as well, because when I was working in a corporate role, I remember at one of my early jobs, I really didn't enjoy it, but it was a stepping stone, and I remember wanting to go into marketing, and then I got a marketing job, and I really enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun. I was like, wow, I get paid to kind of do this. And then after that, it kind of evolved for me. I was like, I want to do something a bit more commercial. Well, I actually got an opportunity to do a commercial role. I did that, and then I was like, oh, this, and it was a completely different career path. And then I did something commercial, and again, I was like, oh, I really enjoy this. But what was possible for me started to expand, and then from there, you know, again, it's been a, you know, like you, I'm a coach, and it's been about a 4-year process to get to where I am today, and I think that, you know, that's really important to recognize when I work with clients and we talk about what they want to do. Sometimes it's a very quick and easy fix, but quite often if people are looking for big change, one thing I tell them is it probably won't happen overnight. That's not a bad thing, but it's useful. And I think a lot of people can get sidetracked and can get, how can I put it, seduced by the quick fix and the, oh, you know, do this and within 6 weeks you'll have your dream job, or manifest this or do that. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen for certain people, but I've certainly seen that it seems to take a bit of time, and it's a process.
Yes, and anything, in my experience, anything I've seen that happens overnight only looks like overnight to the people who are watching it, not to the person who's experiencing it. And particularly if people are interested in making a big industry switch, or start their own business after being in the corporate world. Oftentimes, you know, there's a process of networking, of figuring out what else you need to know to be successful in your new industry, and a whole series of other pieces to discovery. So it doesn't really happen overnight, and that's okay.
Yeah, there's that saying, isn't it? It takes 10 years to be an overnight success.
In my experience, that is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Great. So if someone's listening to this and, you know, they're saying, you know, I'm either not in a job, or, you know, I'm doing something which is a 3 or 4 or 5, and I want to do something that's more in line with what I enjoy, what kind of practical steps can they do? You know, is there something that you would advise them to do?
Sure. So there's a very easily repeatable pattern and steps along the way to making a career transition or to getting a job. And this is the best news, because once you learn the path and the pattern, anytime you decide that you're going to look for a new job, or to switch industries, or to get a promotion, it's the exact same path. So the first thing is, and not to be underestimated, is the committing to doing it. Because so many of my clients come to me, or potential clients come to me and say, hey, I want to leave. Oh, this happened a couple months ago. Hey, I want to leave my consulting job. I've got a business plan to start a company, and I've got potential investors and backers. And my question is, well, how long have you had the business plan? Well, if the answer is 7 years, which it was in this case, then the problem isn't, oh, I want to start the business, is how committed are you to actually making it happen? So that's really the first thing. But then the second thing is really understanding who you are and what you want to create, what you've already done, getting a really clear understanding of yourself. The second component is activating and utilizing your network. And we were talking a little bit before the webinar. You know, so many folks apply for jobs online and send a bajillion resumes and wonder why it is that they aren't getting hired. But the fact is that is a strategy, at least in the US, is statistically, it's about 5% effective in some cases. And so that's the least effective way to get a job. The most effective way is to be in conversation and network. The final piece of the career search that nobody ever talks about, which is really the biggest impediment between, you know, where we are today and where we're going forward, is our fear. And that comes in the form of shoulds and shouldn'ts. Oh, I should stay at this job another year because, you know, I went to law school and so I want to make sure my degree matters. Or I shouldn't leave yet because I need to have X amount of years on my resume. Or all of those things, as well as our assumptions about how the market works, who hires whom, all of that nonsense. and I use that word very, very purposefully, it's just nonsense. Those are stories that we make up about what is or isn't possible for ourselves. So we can shine the light on that fear part, then finding the job, reaching out, doing the networking, that part's relatively easy. And then you find the job.
I love those 3 steps. And what's really interesting is, as you were talking about the first 2, what was coming up in my head was, oh, well, what stops people? It's fear. And then you said the 3rd step, which was fear. And that's so interesting, because I was literally talking about that with a client just before we had this webinar, specifically around career, which was that I think you're right that, you know, you commit to what you want to do, you take the steps you need to take, but quite often that isn't what really holds people back. It's not what they need to do. It's not the how per se. And I love that we're giving people some practical steps as well. It seems to be, and I know from my own experience, I won't talk about anyone else, but I know when I was in my corporate roles and I was doing well, I got promoted every couple of years. I look back and know that if I had managed to overcome some of my fear, and if I looked at the world as I do now, I could have been, you know, twice as successful as I was. And really, I think one of the things that I talk about to my clients is really the fear isn't telling us not to do something. The fear is just telling us that's how we're looking at the situation right now.
Yeah, exactly. Or that we haven't done it before, or you know, this idea of what we should and shouldn't do, or related how the job search should or shouldn't be. That's where people really get tripped up a lot of the time is, oh, well, it should work this way. Or back in 2007, when I was last looking for a job, the world was this way, so it should work the same. And it kind of doesn't matter how we think the world should work. If the world is working a different way, then it's about getting rid of that fear and just modifying our actions to fit the way that the world really does work and the world really is.
So just staying on that for a little second, what I'm assuming is you're not really saying that you need to overcome that first. You're not adding another step into the process around, well, I need to overcome the fear first. Once I can overcome the fear, then I can take my business plan and move forward, or then I can apply for the job that I really want. Because
exactly. Yes, there's no, you don't get rid of the fear first. If we had to get rid of all of our fear before we did anything, no one would ever, most people would never get anything done. The difference is just recognizing it, seeing it for what it is, seeing that until now it's been blocking us, so that we can say, okay, great. I thought the market should work this way, or I thought I should have this job for another couple of years, but guess what? That's a story I made up. So I don't need to believe it. And there are actions that I can take to get myself around it. Doesn't mean those actions won't be scary or that you won't still feel scared, but recognizing that there's a fear there, and just shining the light on it, or, you know, inviting the little gremlin to sit down and have dinner with you makes it a lot less scary.
So we've got a real practical question now, which I love, and I encourage people to type in, use a little chat box. If you've got anything for Elatia or myself, please type it in there. And James has asked the question, hi, what are your thoughts on moving into a completely new industry regarding building a network and having credibility in that industry?
Yeah, so moving into a new industry is a fantastic adventure, and it's actually, the process itself is fairly easy and pretty logical. So let's assume you're working in banking now and you want to go into a nonprofit sector. So the first thing that you do is you look at who you already know. And this is alumni from your school. This is colleagues, friends, people in your LinkedIn network, people on Facebook, people on Twitter, people who you are connected to. And there are, most of us have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, simply by virtue of existing in a digital world. But it's reaching out to them and saying, hi, I'm working in banking. I'm interested in moving over to nonprofit. You who works in nonprofit or who has had experience with it, what kind of advice would you have for someone like me? Now, this isn't a job ask. I think that's a really important distinction. This isn't, hey, I want a job. Do you have one for me? It's, you become Sherlock Holmes. What do I need to know to make this kind of a switch? What kinds of things am I going to face? What's going to be easy? What's going to be a challenge? And through that effort, what begins to happen is you begin to understand what you need to do to make a switch. You will begin to discover perhaps knowledge that you don't have yet that you can go out and acquire. And most certainly, you're going to begin to discover where the job opportunities are. And it's about doing that until you've reached enough people so that you create an opportunity for yourself. And when you reach out and you have these conversations, there's the one, for as Sherlock Holmes as you are, the one most critical question to ask anyone in this kind of an informational interview is, who else do you know who could help me with something like this, could add some additional insight or perspective?
That's some great advice. And you were talking about your network, and I guess of the Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm assuming the one that's the most relevant to this kind of question is LinkedIn. And I know a few years ago, I didn't say this earlier on, but part of my job when I was in a corporate was to deal with recruitment suppliers. So I've had a little bit of involvement in this industry. And one thing that I found was that more and more, at least in the UK, and this is going back about 4 years, recruiters were moving more and more to LinkedIn. And then when I was in my last corporate job a couple of years ago, people, and I work for a big global company, that LinkedIn was used quite a lot by people to check out professionally where you're at. How important do you think LinkedIn is? And can you give any tips or advice around that?
Sure. So LinkedIn is important, but not necessarily for this component of doing outreach and networking. Because while we're looking for jobs in a professional, it is a job, therefore professional, anyone in your network is going to know. Friends and family are going to know. So Facebook is just as great a resource for reaching out and getting into conversation as LinkedIn or Twitter. And in fact, Facebook might even be better. Wow. Because you already have a warmer connection with people. I know you, you know me, we're friends, we went to school together. Where LinkedIn becomes really critically important is in having a robust profile, which is basically your resume now. Now, there's a great book called What Color is Your Parachute? And it's been around since I think the late 70s or early 80s. But the guy who wrote it, Richard Bowles, talks about how Google is now your new resume. I mean, your resume does exist. You need it for certain things, or your CV, but Google is the new resume. So having a LinkedIn profile that's filled out, that has a picture on it, that mirrors the kind of crisp, concise, effective language that would be on a really good resume is something critical to have, because not only is someone going to look up your name immediately and see who you are and what you're up to, but also what people don't know, or a lot of people don't know, is that recruiters on the back end of LinkedIn, there's actually tools that they have to search for people with your kind of experience. So if you utilize keywords in your LinkedIn profile, the recruiters can actually find you that way as someone who might be able to do a job that they have.
And what are some of the mistakes that people make on LinkedIn? I see some myself. So I think the biggest one I see is inappropriate profile pictures, where people have pictures that are more suitable to Facebook than they are to LinkedIn. But what are some of the mistakes you see people making on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's the picture is a big one, and so it's the not professional picture or not having a picture. That's really sketchy to a recruiter. And having been on the other side of the table as a recruiter, whenever you see someone without a picture, you're kind of like, wait a minute, that's kind of weird. What's this person up to? So that's the first thing. Have a picture, have an appropriate picture. The next thing is not filling out your summary. So there's in LinkedIn, there's your profile picture, which has your name, where you live, and then there's a section for a summary about you. So having that blank, it's great to have a quick little synopsis of who you are and what you're up to in the world. Grammatical errors and discrepancies in formatting are also kind of a no-no. It seems like a nitpicky kind of a thing, but if you imagine, each recruiter who's going in there to look at you looks for maybe 10 seconds, or if that, to just glance through what your profile is. If it's a mess and poorly formatted and hard to read, then it's more likely that they will skip over you, because there are, millions of people on LinkedIn.
And so those are some of the mistakes. What are some of the things that people can do to go from a good resume or CV or LinkedIn profile to a great one? And I'll just throw in something that I was told. One of the things I was told was, rather than just having a description of what you've done, which is good, really talk about outcomes and achievements. But you're more of an expert. I wonder what else you can tell us.
Yeah, that's a really critical piece. So many people write their resumes, I was responsible for overseeing a department. Well, okay, but that doesn't really tell me very much. I was responsible for overseeing a department of 50 people that I grew from 2 people to 50 people with a revenue of however many millions of dollars. The more you can quantify your results, the more the easier it is for recruiters and hiring managers to understand what you're actually capable of doing, as opposed to just description, really putting some color around it. Something else to go from a good resume or LinkedIn profile to a great one is looking out for language that's company specific or industry specific. A lot of organizations that I've worked for have acronyms and titles for jobs that only make sense internally, analyst 4 or user experience designer 3, whatever. That doesn't really mean anything to anyone outside. So taking a step back and saying, okay, if I met a total stranger on the street who knew nothing about what I'm doing, will they understand what I'm saying, or is there a better way to communicate that? Those are probably the two biggest things.
Fantastic. That's really, really helpful and really practical. We've got some more questions on the side. We've got a few coming in, so we'll try and get through these. So we've got one from Tom. I left my job a few years ago as a senior manager, just shy of the executive band in a Fortune 10 company, to start a coaching business. Sounds familiar, right?
Yeah.
About a year into that venture, I realized that while I love coaching, I feel more at home in the corporate setting and have been heavily back in the job market for about a year with little luck. I'm receiving feedback that I'm overqualified for many jobs that I'd gladly accept, and that the jobs at my level are much more network-based or promoted from within. I've seemingly exhausted my network and have had little luck with applying via job boards. So what advice would you give Tom?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say, Tom, is you're in great company. So don't worry. Don't worry. This is a common kind of a thing that happens. And this is one of those shifts in thinking around how the job search was before, how you used to look for a job, in this case as a more junior kind of executive, and then making the shift over to a more senior kind of a role. So it really is no wonder to me that it's been more challenging to find a job online. And as far as activating your network without being present to how your conversations have been and being able to hear what you're saying and how you're talking about things, what I would wonder is, how directed are you being in your questioning and what it is that you're looking for? Are you reaching out to people and saying, hey, I need a job, will you help me? Or, which is a way to go about it, but the reason why that's not as effective, an effective strategy, is that the answer to that is yes or no. So you shut down people's thinking about what's possible for you. Well, gosh, today I don't have a job for you, so no. As opposed to, leaving it open-ended. Hey, I'm making a switch, or I was in the corporate world, I've been doing coaching, and now I'm ready to move back in to combine my experience from outside within a more traditional structure. How might you advise me to do that? What might be some things or pitfalls that I'm looking for? Really looking for advice and information as opposed to what I can get out of the conversation. It's a really critical shift from what can I get from you, get a job, get an opportunity, get a lead, as opposed to what can I learn? Because when you're in the space of what can I learn, then you can become a problem solver because you'll be listening for things that you know how to do that will help the person in your network with whom you're speaking. So that's a shift that's helpful for a lot of folks who are making a transition from either not being employed or being employed as a freelancer or something into a more traditional structure.
Great. I hope that's answered your question, Tom. If you've got a follow-up question, please ask. We've got more of a statement from Arthur. So Arthur is a manager, a mid-level manager in a large organization. Tom just come back, by the way, and said, "Wow, that's really great. Thank you." So thanks for that, Elatia. Great, Tom. Glad that's been helpful. Arthur said for his company, he hires 2 to 4 people a year and typically gets 2,000 to 3,000 job applications. The people that show up and deliver their CVs in person always end up in the maybe pile of 10 to 15 applications before the final decision or interview. What are your thoughts on that? So is that a common thing? Is that unique to perhaps Arthur's company? Do you think people should turn up and deliver CVs in person? My recruitment experience has been within very large organizations. And so if someone were to show up and drop off their resume, that's not something that would work well for me or would have worked well for me or for my team members. I mean, it's kind of fine, but people are busy. So what I'm imagining is happening with you in your environment, I don't know how large your company is, but if it's on the smaller side, someone who's having a conversation with you in person, they aren't just a piece of paper to you anymore, or they aren't just a LinkedIn profile to you, but rather someone with whom you've had presumably an engaging conversation, who you liked, who, in their initial presentation, they were able to show you something about their ability to successfully do what it was that you needed them to do. So I think that there's no one right way to do anything, but I would imagine, again, without having a detailed context, that's the reason why so many of those folks come in. And also, if you're in a salesy kind of an environment, someone who has the wherewithal and goes the extra mile to come into the office and visit, that might be a plus for you as well. Thanks, Elatia. So one of the questions that we got prior to the webinar was someone talking about the changing nature of work and how that, traditionally used to have a job for life. Now it's people moving, went to move to different companies over their lifetime. Now it's like different companies and different industries. We're now going from different industries to even different countries. What does the future hold in your opinion for the workplace for people?
Sure. There's a fabulous book called Average is Over. It's written by a guy called Tyler Cohen. And this book posits that the future of the workplace is that there's going to be many, many, many more of us who are in freelancer kind of roles or entrepreneurial kinds of roles working for ourselves. And even beyond that, having what I call kind of a mosaic of activities that you do that bring in money, not just one thing. And the way that he posits, and I agree with his argument that the job market is going to continue to shift, is people who have the ability to combine knowledge about technology and the human experience are really going to be at the forefront of where jobs are. the folks who come up with, who develop the world-changing technology, that's going to be in that place. And then he refers to them as the people who make those people feel good. So the marketers, and then the service industries, consulting, coaching, those kinds of things. That's where a bulk of the work is going to be. And then, average being over, as opposed to a bell curve of employment, the bulk of it's going to be in those spaces that I just said, and it's going to kind of tail off to other industries. So yes, it is shifting, which is why it's all the more important to let go of this notion of how we think the world should work and be flexible and open to the way that it is working now, so that we can be more successful more quickly.
So if there's someone listening to this that isn't in one of those service industries, they're not maybe world-class in IT and new solutions, maybe they're later on in their career, maybe they're early on and they've got another few decades of work ahead of them. What can they do to really line themselves up to not be redundant in 10 years and not have the skills that would be useful?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is to be aware. And what I mean by that is don't just get your job and go to the office and never poke your head up to see what's going on out there in the world. So read the newspaper or some source of news information so that you can understand how the world is shifting, what's going on in the marketplace. Be plugged in. There are all kinds of, this is a beautiful thing about the world that we live in today. There are meetup groups. There are special interest groups. There's the internet, there are all kinds of online classes and things. Be curious. Go out into the world and figure out what's going on there. Pay attention to things that you yourself are interested in. And it doesn't matter if you don't like where the world is going, or, oh no, I don't have those skills today. Are these skills I want to acquire? Is this going to be interesting for me? Or is there a way for me to figure out how to continue to make money within the space that I already am? But I would say the biggest thing is to be aware, don't stop learning, and to be curious and involved and engaged.
And what I'm hearing is it doesn't really matter what you're curious about. And there's that famous Stanford address that what's his name, the Apple guy, Steve Jobs, said, and he's like, he just followed things that were curious and he was passionate about, that really led him to then bringing that into Apple. And I know that's been true in my life as well, that I've followed things that were just interesting to me, and that brings a certain passion with it, which is very, very different to, I remember when I was at school and I was picking A-levels, which is subjects you choose at 18, and I picked subjects which I thought I should pick, and I didn't do as well as I could do, and I learned my lesson from that. So it sounds like that's the same sort of thing now, what you're saying, for career advice.
That's exactly it. And people get tripped up with the word passion, and when you talk about passion, it's not what can I do so that I don't ever have to go to work. I mean, that's that is a question where, if you want to have a 4-hour work week or do that, but that's a different kind of a thing. And passion isn't necessarily, oh, it's easy every day, but it's this notion of going in and learning and discovery and creation. And as you said, it really doesn't matter what you're passionate about, but the question, you only become redundant or left behind if you stop growing, because the world's constantly changing. And if you are trying to glom on and stick to the way things were, at some point it's not going to work. So being curious and out there is fantastic.
And it's really interesting that you say that as well, because I think this, certainly with the group that we're running this for, the most popular answer I asked a question today, that what's important for people in their work, and the number one answer was doing work that they love, which is completely in line with this webinar. But the second most popular question was doing work where I grow as a person. And so, for people that are listening to this, I'm assuming you're the kind of people that you enjoy personal growth in your career anyway, in your job. And I think what Elatia is pointing to is you can do that outside of your job as well. You don't need to wait. And I know there was a big shift for me in my corporate career when I decided, for the first few years, I came through a graduate scheme, and I was, a lot of money was spent on me, and I was doing training courses. And then I got to the stage where I realized I'm not going to wait for my company to spend the money on me. I'm going to go and do this myself. And there was a chap that I worked with who was more junior to me, who used to spend, his own money every year doing something that was helpful to his career. And I remember asking him, like, wow, you're taking a week out of your holiday and you're spending your own money to do whatever course he was doing. Like, really? Why? And it just made sense to him. And I've just seen yesterday that he's been promoted to a very, very senior position in, just a few years. This is his third job since I worked with him. And to me, it's no surprise, because he's not waiting for anyone. He's just kind of going and doing that himself.
Yeah, that's another really important thing that you hit on there, which is not sitting back and, sitting on the proverbial couch with a bowl of chips or popcorn and watching the film of your life unfold in front of you, but rather being a protagonist in the action. So being involved in what's going on, because no one else is gonna. I have never known a scenario where someone just knocks on your front door and says, "Here's the job that you've always wanted. Congratulations." It doesn't happen. So by being out there and involved and engaged, that's where you have the opportunity to do these kinds of great things, because you're creating the opportunity.
We had another question in the group, which was really aimed at business, about investing in business. But since we're talking about this topic, how much time, how much money is a good indication for someone to be investing in themselves? If people really want to do really well, if they want to be great, how much should they be investing?
Well, I think the question is less about the how much and more about the what. Because there's all kinds of, if we get into how much should we be investing, then, oh no, what if I'm just out of school or I don't have any money? How am I going to get professional development? There's all kinds of free stuff out there. So as you're discovering what you want to get involved in or get engaged in or learn or aggregate to your bag of tricks, the stuff that you can be up to in the world, there's all kinds of free courses. Apple has a ton of free online, Apple University or iTunes University or whatever it's called. There are free courses about everything from statistics, which I actually took a refresher statistics course online, to neuroscience, to economics. So there's tons of stuff you can get out there for free. And then as you develop more and more interest, then you may want to pay for more structured courses or more recognized in the workplace kinds of courses. Now, I myself spend a lot of money on my own professional development. I have a coach who I work with who's fabulous. Ankush and I are in the same global group of coaches. We work together with another coach. I mean, we spend a lot of time and money on professional development because, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the barrier to entry in our industry of coaching is pretty low, but which means that those who are excellent, there aren't quite as many of them. So really focusing on professional development has been important for me. But that's what I'd say. I'd say it's less about the how much as opposed to the doing it and doing it in a way that you are invested with your intellect.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Elatia. And I'm thinking back. I haven't thought about this for a while, but I'm thinking back to my corporate days, and I was always very much into self-development. And I found that whilst not everyone's into it, that I used to bring in books because I used to bring in audio CDs. I was always into stuff, and I used to share them with my boss. I used to share them with the director in our team and other people. And people are really interested in this stuff, I think, nowadays. And you're right. It's great that either at no cost or low cost. I mean, Google, you can find a ton of stuff just on Google about pretty much any subject. For a low fee. Again, your next level is Amazon, and there are a ton of books that are on Amazon. And I believe Audible, which is owned by Amazon, you can get audiobooks, and there's a ton of stuff there as well. So, and things like this webinar, and I know Brian Johnson reviews books as well. I love his site. You're right, there's a ton of stuff that people can do. And I remember listening to the old school Brian Tracy, who was someone I used to listen to years ago. And he really talked about doing something every day. And I tested this out for a while, and I used to work in procurement, so professional buying. And I was pretty good at my job, I'd like to think, and I did well. But spending even just 20 minutes, half an hour reading the industry press or going and researching things, and I did this for a short time, it made such a huge difference to how I showed up at work and my skill set and my abilities. And that kind of then led to my confidence increasing, which then in turn led to me enjoying work more. It's kind of this positive reinforcing circle. And what's great is I don't think this is also, it is true. I agree with you, in our profession, there's a low barrier to entry. But what I also found, and I guess this depends on how senior you are, but also in corporate organizations, whatever, and I work, for a really big organization, which was, supposedly difficult to get a job at. And again, even with any organization, you get people who cruise, and
yes.
and there are people that really stand out. And so that's a really good thing, because I think if you put a bit of time and effort and a little bit of energy, you can really stand out quite easily in your career. Is that your experience too? Again, I'm putting words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, yes, it is really my experience. And even in the job search itself, the people who are most successful are the ones who engage in it. And what do I mean by that? In a job search and going into a company for an interview, great, you get the interview. But if you haven't read about the company, if you haven't figured out for your own self how you imagine you would fit in there, if you haven't studied up about the industry to understand what some of the challenges are, you are denying yourself an opportunity to really stand out as a candidate. And so being involved in those kinds of, being proactive and learning is something that's really valuable, whether it's for career growth or a career switch.
I'm really loving this webinar. We're covering so much, and we're getting towards the end of time. If anyone's got any other questions, if there's anything that we haven't answered so far, please do get your question in before we run out of time. We like I said, we've covered a lot here today. I guess the question that I've got for you at the moment is, what about someone who is in a job, they are, they're at a certain level like you talked about before, and they want to get promoted. So they're not necessarily looking to do massive shifts, massive changes, but they're just looking to get promoted right now and just start moving up the career ladder. What advice would you have for people like that?
Yeah, the advice is actually quite similar. Understanding what's going on in your organization, what you really like to do. And it's easier when you're on the inside, because you've got a whole company of people who you can just go meet, talk to, ask what's going on in their part of the organization. When I was in both at Anheuser-Busch InBev and at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal, I spent a lot of time speaking with folks in, although I was in HR, in marketing and product development and sales, because it makes you better at what you do. If you can understand what's going on in the business as a whole, it allows you to do your job better because you understand it within the context of the greater universe. But also, it gives you information for the kinds of opportunity, what might be coming up and available, what you might like to do. And so getting curious, networking within your organization. Even before that, the critical thing, doing the job that you have well, can't be underestimated enough. Thinking about, oh, I want a promotion, I want to do this. Well, if you aren't showing up and doing what's here today, then the longer term success that you're looking for isn't going to happen. So I think that's baseline. But once you move beyond that, reaching out into the organization and doing that same kind of learning, looking for problems that need to be solved that no one's solving. And they're everywhere. So, when you hear someone complaining about something, your boss complaining or your boss's boss complaining about something week after week, maybe that's a problem you could offer to solve, even if it's not part of your job description, because those are the kinds of opportunities that can move you forward and help you get promoted.
So I think it comes back down to a thing again that I heard years ago, which is enthusiasm, and just how far that goes in the workplace.
Yes, exactly. Enthusiasm and curiosity, and hard work. The good hard work, and hard work doesn't need to be serious or boring or miserable, but that delicious discipline of committing to doing your job well, doing what you said you're going to do, delivering or exceeding on expectations, and then being curious and seeing what else is out there and how else you might be able to support.
We've got a question from a different author. He's working for a very small organization. There's only him and one other person in the organization. And what Arthur says is that they seem to be struggling with money and finance all the time. And what would be good leverage points for that company? There's only 2 of them. They're in hardware development. This was a question he asked before, so unfortunately we can't get any more detail because he's not live. But what are the leverage points for him in that organization?
In terms of him getting himself promoted?
Well, just I think more of the company, because it's just him and someone else, and they seem to be in a company that's struggling. He enjoys the job, but just the company's not doing too well. What can they do? Is there any advice that you could give them?
Sure. Well, without understanding the exact context of what's going on in their organization, the first place that I would go is what assumptions you have about what's going on with your organization. And these are the explicit ones, so the ones that we all use. I imagine that the price of oil is going up X% this year, so I'm going to assume our cost is going to go up by the same amount. Or competition in my market works a certain way. I would look at all of those explicit assumptions, and then I'd really go digging for the implicit ones. The product's going to market itself because I think it's a great idea. Everyone else is going to think it's a great idea. Because once you see what you're assuming about what's going on, you're going to begin to understand that those assumptions are stories that you're making up about what's real there. And I would begin to then create possibilities for your company that go beyond the constraints of what those assumptions tell you is or isn't possible.
Fantastic. I think I just want to kind of add to that, and in terms of what are the leverage points, and it is a very general question. I think the biggest leverage points is Arthur and his colleague. I think
Absolutely.
There's so many examples of companies where they've got the same resources as the competitors. They've got everything is the same. They've got access to the same technology and everything else. And the thing that really helps companies stand out is the people and the creativity that they bring. So I know that's again a bit of a generic answer, but I think again it's something that can be overlooked because we look to outside circumstances, situations, and box ourselves in rather than looking at what potential we've got to ourselves. And you don't need to do this, but again, building on what Elatia said, if you've got a coach, go and explore this with a coach. If you haven't got a coach, go and explore it with a friend, someone who doesn't know anything about your company, and just test out those assumptions. Ask them, to ask you, what do you do? Why can't you grow? What's holding you back? And even in just that conversation, I think it can bring stuff out.
Yeah, it really can. I'm actually delivering a workshop in 2 days in San Antonio here in the U.S. And that's one of the most amazing things that happens as we begin to explore these assumptions, is that let's say that I have a problem with growing my company. The person next to me can have the exact same problem, but they can offer me advice about it that they couldn't see for themselves, or and vice versa. I can offer you advice for the same problem that I have, but I can't see my own solution for. So reaching outside and getting into conversation with people can often be enough to just spark the ideas that you need.
Fantastic. We're pretty much out of time, Elatia. Is there any final bits of advice or anything that you didn't cover that you desperately want to get out before we close up today?
The thing that I would desperately want to get out is that anyone in any kind of job search, you're the one who has control over what's going on in your career. And this is a little bit what you were just saying about what's going on with the companies, but you don't need to let outside circumstances dictate the success of your professional development or your job switch or your job search. You are the captain of this ship. And so once you realize that and realize that there's a lot of stuff that you do have control over and you aren't just going and begging for a job, your success, your level of success, your approach to the whole job search or job switch or promotion is going to be that much more powerful.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Elatia. And if someone's listening to this and they want to know more, I know you've got a bunch of resources on your website, or if they want to hire you or just ask a question, what's the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Checking out my website, which is my full first and last name, elatiaabate.com. And reach out, get into conversation with me. There are plenty of resources available on my site, and I'm happy to share all of those and more with you. But yeah, that's the easiest way, through my website, elatiaabate.com.
Great. And if anyone's listening to this and they want to be part of the Powerful Men's group that I run, just check us out. It's facebook.com/groups/the-PMG. We don't let everyone into the group, but if you send me a message and we can have a conversation and we can see if you're a good fit for the group. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed that. I found it fascinating. I'm going to be referring people to watch this that I've had conversations with recently. So thank you so much, Elatia. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And thanks everyone who's joined us online and for the questions that you asked us.
Thanks for joining, everyone.